welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, with your questers Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things hierarchical and gemological, as we're going to talk about the House of the Nine Diamonds, House Carinci, from the Serpent River Sourcebook, and anywhere else you can possibly find anything written down about the Tiskrang in any of the Earthdawn lore. So if you have any questions for us, because we actually had this as part of a lot of people wrote in saying, talk about the Tiskrang houses. So here you are. We talked about river travel a couple episodes ago and what that would be like. But now we're going to talk about one of the main houses on the Serpent River itself, House Carinci. As I said, the House of the Nine Diamonds. Where do you want to start? Because this is densely written material. There's a lot to go over. So
there's a lot to go over.
Strap in, people. Strap in.
Yeah, House Carinci is the dominant aropagoi of the south reach of the Serpent River. Their control extends from a little bit beyond Lake Ban, which is where the Coil River intersects with the Serpent. A little bit downstream, a little bit south, as it were, of Lake Ban, all the way to the Mist Swamps. And so they control that stretch of the Serpent, as well as the tributaries running through the Servos jungle, because all of those empty down into the south reach. There are sort of two rivers that flow into the Serpent coming up from the south, one of which goes by Travar, and I now cannot for the life of me remember the name of it.
The Byrose.
Yeah, the Byrose River.
The Byrose?
And the Iontos River is the other one. Yeah. The Iontos River, unfortunately, runs through or very close to the Badlands through much of its length.
Yep.
Prior to the Scourge, it was a very valuable and worthwhile tributary. But now, because of its proximity to and even travel through the Badlands, is pretty much not usable at all. And then you've also got the Tylon River, which is its own issue that we will perhaps cover in a bit more depth when we talk about House Carinci in a few episodes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in theory, the Tylon River, which runs up to Kratos and has its foothills up in the Tylon Mountains, is also, because it's a tributary in the South Reach, is ostensibly Carinci controlled. Though that is very much in dispute at the moment.
Absolutely. So that gives us the overall layout of where the House Carinci operates. Let's go over a couple of other things just to catch up on last time. So the Gadonia for House Carinci, their introductory ritual, so forth, to be included in the house. You are granted an earring of ruby and gold. This is their colors. This is their moniker. It's their identification. It's worn in the skin folds of the left ear slits of any Tiskrang that are there, and or if you've got if for some reason you're non-Tiskrang and allowed into the Gadonia, good on you. But there are 16. So their base of operations basically is 16 towers, forming a 9-diamond shape, 3x3, essentially. And it's at the base or the junction of the Byrose and the Serpent. So just north of Travar, where like 3 rivers meet, essentially. And they've got a long, long history. Before the Scourge, they were allied with the Theran Empire. They still kind of are. And today they still have very close ties with Thera and Travar. A little bit. So they're playing. And the other thing to know about the House Carinci is they are very much known for their war college.
Yeah. House Carinci, broadly speaking, is operated as a military autocracy, in a sense. The shivalahala is a very strong warrior and fighter and is sort of ostensibly the leader of the war college. Although she is busy with so many other things that she generally doesn't involve herself much in the day-to-day operations of it.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would go so far as to say that Carinci is closely allied with Travar, because there have been, at least as sort of revealed in the Travar book, yes, Travar is on a river that is the exclusive control of House Carinci, but the merchants of Travar don't like that for any kind of river travel that they might want to do, they effectively have to pay House Carinci for it. Whether because they are using Carinci ships, or if they were to have their own, they would still need to pay the tolls and fees and the bakshivas required for operating on the Carinci stretch of the river. And so there has been this kind of tension between them and some incidents that have made, while they are not at war, diplomatic relations between the two powers are strained. Mainly because
fair enough,
the merchant princes of Travar don't like giving up their money to other people in the way that
in the region
you have to if you're doing business on the Serpent River network.
Exactly. So let's say they maybe still have some close ties.
Yes,
with Travar. They were allied before, way before the Theran Wars, but they're still trying to curry favor with Thera in that regard. So a little history for everybody, because we had to mine the depth of the pages in the Serpent River, because wow, there's just a ton of information there. House Carinci was founded 200 years before the Orichalcum Wars, roughly 205 Thera, roughly 205 Thrall, by 4 Tiskrang villages. And so they've been around for about 1,300 years. So this is a long-lasting house.
Yeah, and we talked in the previous sort of Serpent River book about how the aropagoi, how the great houses kind of developed into a cartel through the alliances of multiple villages banding together for mutual benefit. And that's exactly what happened here in the case of Carinci. Some successful villages that had made some money in piracy kind of banded together, and then gradually got more and more people allied with them, and their military might really kind of led them to a very strong position in control of the south reach of the Serpent, and closely allied themselves with Thera, who was in control of Barsaive at the time, which did even more for advancing their fortunes.
Yes. They specifically allied themselves with the influence of the Theran House Carinci. They all pooled the resources and built the 16 towers. So House Carinci and these 4 Tiskrang villages built the 16 towers. A lot of piracy involved in all this, but then again, who doesn't? But they had an alliance with Thera that lasted about 1,000 years, which is, again, nothing to sneeze at as far as influence and power is concerned. House Carinci did awaken from the Scourge very, very late, later than House Vistrimen. And this has caused some strife, as Josh will get into in a minute or so. So Thera and House Carinci tried to reconquer Barsaive, and Vistrimen had laid all other settlements under their protection. And Thera therefore had to abandon House Carinci only. And this is where they signed a truce and the Free Trade Compact came in. So this is all just right before that. Whole lot of political maneuverings. This is your own Game of Thrones series right here, if we ever make an Earth on TV show, because I'm in this vein right now.
One of the notable things, because of the alliance that they had with Thera and the wealth that they accumulated from the period during the Orichalcum Wars and the various piracy and whatnot that they were doing on the south reach of the Serpent River, the 16 Towers, the 9 Diamonds fortress, was a very powerful citadel and was where all of the House Carinci foundations retreated to weather the Scourge, and they were one of the ones that went into that extended hibernation period that was talked about for some of the Tiskrang during the Scourge because of, how they potentially would go a little bit stir crazy. But something happened during the Scourge. Like, largely they got through the Scourge without any major issues, except that when they woke up, there were a bunch of them missing.
Well, that's not good. A bunch of House Carinci missing.
Yeah.
Right. One of the families disappeared.
Almost the entire foundation of the Carioli Nial and its 4 riverboats all just disappeared for reasons that nobody knows. And so when the Therans returned, and House Vistrimen didn't wake up really, not Vistrimen, I'm sorry, House Carinci didn't wake up until the Therans returned and like landed their airships there at the fortress, which also raised some questions about what was going on. That in order to sort of fill that gap in their numbers, they invited members of the Tiskrang House Carinci to join them. And so there is a group of Theran Tiskrang from House Carinci that have been inducted into House Carinci as a new foundation.
Yeah, it's a new Niall. So speaking of the towers, we're right at the part of the book where I take details on these things because I like to insert these for flavor text for my players every once in a while. Of the 16 towers, most of them are up to 300 feet tall, 200 or more feet in diameter. These are not like, pylons or maybe the Leaning Tower of Pisa. These are huge towers. These are the largest and tallest towers of anybody else's on the river. These have a natural rock formation appearance with wooden balconies, wooden and rope bridges between some towers at certain places as well. And if you've ever been to Universal Studios, and some of you may have been, I have been, there's a whole network of rope bridges in one part of the Islands of Adventure park that I think would make a fantastic viewing for what that would look like for those rope bridges.
Yeah, in the Serpent River book, there is a color picture by Jim Nelson, a longtime FASA illustrator.
Oh, yes.
That shows one of the towers, and so puts it into scale in comparison to the riverboats to give you a sense of this thing. And so that's the tower where it exists above the river. It then extends below the river as well, significantly. And you've got 18 of these?
16
towers, 16 towers
16
total.
towers. Yeah.
In that sort of 9-diamond pattern, but 16 of these. And then they're sort of they have got connections with ferries and all sorts of things. It's a fairly sizable city.
Yeah, it's like 16 skyscrapers.
Yeah.
30-story skyscrapers. 16 of them all clustered together. Wow. Yeah. Just, again, that needs to be on screen. Each tower has a very wide encircling boardwalk for docking, loading, undocking, so forth and so on. And the inner 4 towers are incredibly vast. Each can house a dry-docked riverboat with plenty of room to spare. So in case you need to set some flavor text and describe how cavernous these things are, they're pretty darn big.
Yeah.
So getting back to some other things about House Carinci, they operate, I can't say a little differently than the other houses, because we'll get to the differences later on in the other episodes. But Carinci is one of those houses that still regularly captures Tiskrang slaves from primitive tribes or of the Servos jungle.
Look, let's be frank here. House Carinci is kind of one of the bad guy factions of the Serpent River. Because of their alliance with the Theran Empire, they still practice slavery. They will capture primitive Tiskrang from the Servos jungle, mainly.
What they need to with them.
They're not great. Because they were allied with Thera, they've kind of ended up getting the rough end of things. Because unlike Thera, who could sort of retreat and leave, where at the end of the first Theran War, they retreated to Sky Point, and after the second Theran War, are pretty much out of Barsaive. House Carinci can't really go anywhere, and they kind of need to stay and deal with the consequences of what has happened in a way that the Therans have not.
Because it's a river, not an ocean. They can't just go where they want.
Yeah. And so there is some, because of the free trade compact, where they kind of lost a good source of revenue off of the main branch of the Serpent in the South Reach, because the Iontos River is now no longer viable in terms of a source of income, and because of the conflict going on the Tylon River with the resurgent House Carinci, which we'll talk, House Ticambris. See, these similar names.
Carinci, Ticambris, yeah, it's the KT, the TK. I get you. I'm with you. I am.
Because of that conflict, they're not necessarily making as much profit out of that river as they otherwise would. And so just generally speaking, House Carinci is on a downside in terms of their profits, in terms of their status and their place within the Serpent River culture in general. I don't know that I would necessarily say that they are full-blown villains. I think they're just a good kind of convenient bad guy faction in a sense that they are not in a great place culturally.
Yeah.
And because of their history prior to the Scourge, there's a lot of pride wrapped up in them that is kind of a problem for them when it comes to interacting with the rest of culture. Now, fortunately, they've mostly, like, nobody's attacking them or going after them or anything like that, but they're just not generally looked upon particularly well because they were allies with Thera, and Thera were definitely bad guys. I imagine, especially at this stage of things, where Thera is not present as much, like Thera no longer has quite the presence in Barsaive that before, that they probably might have scaled back their slaving operations to some extent. It's not something that we have directly addressed. But if there's not a market for it, then there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of sense for them to necessarily be continuing that as a practice.
Yeah, I could see where House Carinci not having the parental figure or the big brother figure that they've tried to hero worship Thera a little bit. Once that influence is gone, they can kind of keep up the appearance of, well, this is how we've always known to do it. And so over the last 10 years, since the 4th edition update to the timeline, I could see them finally beginning to maybe find their own identity, maybe stopping, to your point, stopping slavery as much as they were, gathering people to either sell or use. So I can see this identity crisis right now for House Carinci in trying to become their own house and not just, I mean, they're still trying to curry favor with the Theran Empire. So maybe not to the degree I'd like them to, but yeah, easily a bad guy. Not so much as evil as Thera, but just they don't know any better. They're just copying Thera because they still want to curry Thera's favor. That's one of those things. Because he had 1,000 years with them. That's a long-term relationship. Yeah. Kind of hard to break your practices in the last 10 years or so. So getting to some hierarchy of House Carinci, to Josh's point he made earlier, the shivalahala contention is, in the course of the writing of the Serpent River, a 10th circle warrior. Any 4th edition update, maybe she's gained another circle, you think?
I don't know. 10th circle puts her solidly into the warden tier, which makes sense for an individual of such high renown and prowess. Whether, we'll decide that she's now 11th circle or whatever, I don't think that makes a huge difference one way or the other. If we write something up about her, then maybe we'll kind of make that decision at that time.
Yeah, I figured it's been a decade.
She is solidly a warden tier adept.
Yeah, totally. I just figure over the course of 10 years, she's learned something or two. However, she does rule, to Josh's point, like you said earlier, rules like an autocrat. She doesn't have a whole lot of advisors. She delegates most of her lesser affairs to the Carinci Council, which we'll get to in a second or so, because that is unique to Carinci as well. So, yeah, she doesn't have a lot of patience, and she has kind of this military mind. So I would treat her as an NPC if I were running her as an NPC for a while. Military general, quick drill sergeant kind of approach to things. You better know your stuff or you're out on your keister. And yeah, just not a whole lot of patience. So very, very sharp wit and sharp tongue as far as a tongue lashing is concerned, because she does take care of the War College, which is modeled after the Theran Military Academy. And it is the largest warrior school in Barsaive. So she's in charge of that. That is her pet project. That is her baby. That is the thing she wants to take care of the most. That's where her attention lies. Yeah,
there's another aspect to her as well, however. We didn't touch upon this when we were talking about the towers, but Tiskrang villages in general have like an underwater garden area.
Yes.
And the one there at 9 diamonds at the fortress is legendary. It is incredibly beautiful and unique in terms of its grandeur and so forth. It occupies more or less sort of the entire space between the central 4 towers of the diamond structure. And that garden is also a personal project of the Shivalahala.
Mm-hmm.
That dichotomy in a way, which is also perhaps in a way very like warrior adept.
Yeah.
In a way, yes, there is the military discipline and the strength and offense and defense and that whole thing, but there is also a very contemplative and mystical and reflective aspect of things. And so it's an interesting insight not only into the character of the Shivalahala herself, but also into the dual nature of the warrior, where as a warrior adept, it excels in the craft of war, but as the sort of old saying goes, those who are most skilled at war are the ones who least want to see it actually happening.
Yes. Or
they understand the costs and, what is involved in doing it.
Exactly. And better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So there is that. So let's talk about the thing that is very unique to House Carinci. It is the Carinci Council, made up of 12 Nials, 2 representatives each, so 24 council members, because that's easy math, and also includes the Lahala. So it's basically the Lahala of each of those Nials and an appointee of those Nials. So it gets kind of complicated in here, which is the nature of Tiskrang. There is also an advocate, which is one member of the council, which can veto shivalahala policy. So whatever the shivalahala says, the advocate is the only person that can veto that, and that is a very contentious place to be on the council. But the 25 members of the council is the sum of the towers and the diamonds. So 16 plus 9. So 16 towers, 9 diamonds, 25. That is the number of people involved in the contention complex. So it really is this whole numerology thing with the Tiskrang as well. 5, I think, being one of their favorite numbers because they are 4 limbs and a tail. They're the only ones who have that. So that's really, I think...
And also 25 is the sum of the 16 towers plus the 9 diamonds that they represent.
Yes, and 25 is 5 squared. 5 times 5. So it's a beautiful set of numbers there. So well done. Who wrote this? Sean? Sean? Is that your name?
Yes.
Sean Rhodes. Nicely done. Nicely done, sir. I love all this. But only House Carinci has this council. Nobody else does.
Right.
So this is
in this regard. One of the things that we will discover as we continue diving into the different houses is how each of them are different when it comes to the details, even though in some regards they all kind of follow the broad strokes of Serpent River Tiskrang culture.
Yeah.
And one other thing that's kind of noted is that there are 12 foundations that are part of the aropagoi. There is not direct representation for any of the villages that owe their fealty to those foundations. They are often sort of under the control of an appointee, an officer from the Nial, that sort of kind of tells them how they need to go.
Yeah.
So again, a very sort of top-down structure in terms of how everything goes, which makes a little bit of sense for a city, for a political body that is run by a military commander, by a warrior adept.
Yeah, because since that one family, that one Nial disappeared during the Scourge, I can't call it the feng shui because it's wrong. The overall feeling, the Kayapas, which is a Tiskrang term, K-Y-A apostrophe, A-P-A-S, Kayapas, or Kayapas, is the perfect balance of the house. So the perfect balance between the council and the towers and the diamonds wasn't fulfilled again until they adopted House Carinci to fill the void of that one family house that disappeared during the Scourge. And that took a couple of 100 years. So once that finally got in again, the overall balance was restored to Tiskrang contention sensibilities. And so if you want to play around with a very long, complicated political campaign, take out one of the houses and watch Contention do what it does again. And you can set that into motion in a number of ways and mess with their Chiapas. Just a thought. But yeah, the fact that it's all somewhat numerologically based on 25, I think is really cool. Just one of those things to have. So overall, House Contention has a few goals because all of the houses do. They still want to operate. Yes. They still want to, keep their business going. But they have three main goals: expand influence and increase profits, because that's just all of the houses want to do this. And that's just the way all Tuscarora operate. So really the three other goals are renegotiate the free trade compact, because the Vestrymen gets the Coil River right now, and Contention wants it back. Go, Josh.
So what the objective of their desire to renegotiate the compact is to have the lower Coil River, that is the stretch of river that runs from Lake Ban to Europa, to the Ara Sea.
Yeah.
To have that be under the same free trade guidelines as the main Serpent River itself. Because if that's the case, then anybody can trade with Europa, and the foreign trade that comes in through that port. As of right now, House Vestrymen more or less has exclusive river rights to that trade and is making a killing off of it. Which we kind of talked about in our previous Broad Strokes episode.
Yes.
When we were talking about that, because the Coil River as a tributary falls under the exclusive control of House Vestrymen, and it is the most profitable tributary of the Serpent, and therefore House Vestrymen is making a lot of money. There has been a long rivalry between House Vestrymen and House Contention. Vestrymen is actually older than Contention by a little bit.
Yeah.
But there has been a long, long rivalry between those two aropagoi that goes back to their foundings, essentially. And Vestrymen, their star has been on the rise quite a bit in the post-Scourge era because of their alliance with Thrall and the results of the First Theran War and everything else. House Contention would really like to see the Vestrymen taken down a peg or two, or at least to open up an opportunity for them to gain access to some of the same trade that House Vestrymen currently has a monopoly on.
Well, and it's not that Contention wants the Coil River just for themselves. They just want it to be equal for everybody so they can actually compete along that stretch alone. They still want to maintain theirs as a private, but they want the Coil to be open to everybody because, like Josh said, that brings all of the Ara Sea and everybody across the Ara Sea in through Europa, and that's the major port there. So a lot of business to be done. Second goal they have is convincing Thera that Barsaive is worthy of their time again, and another goal to achieve.
Yeah, this is being from the first edition Serpent River book. This is pre-Second War. I would say that this objective has largely failed. Fair. With the Therans having been driven out of Barsaive pretty definitively, at least for a bit, I imagine that while Contention probably would not be upset if Thera kind of came back, they probably are not as interested in that particular goal as an objective anymore. It seems at this point that backing Thera has been backing a losing horse, at least as far as it goes to Barsaive. Actually, one of the things that's mentioned here in this sort of goals section that might be a little bit more prominent, it does talk about how House Contention could potentially leverage or build a relationship or an agreement with Thrall with regards to the lower Coil River trade, because, of course, Thrallic trade along the river would be subject to Vestrymen influence and tithes and taxes and all of that. That if Contention could potentially leverage Thrall to help renegotiate the compact, then I could basically say, hey, this will save you money because you will no longer you will be able to access the European trade without needing to pay the taxes to Vestrymen. And there's a new, more conservative, business-friendly family now in charge of Thrall, and the change in politics there could mean that with appropriate diplomacy, House Contention could perhaps start leveraging more of a relationship with Thrall to undercut that strong alliance that Vistrimmen has had to leverage to their own benefit over the past several decades.
I had a feeling there was going to be a major 4th edition update to that goal from the Serpent River 1st edition book to now. And the last 3 minutes that Josh laid all that out was perfect.
I will just say that until I had reread this section and saw that, it was not a specific detail that had occurred to me.
Fair.
But is one of those things that's like, jot that down on my mental list of, oh, this is something that we could look at in terms of shaking things up or ways that different powers could interact, and what kind of adventures or stories could spin out of that.
Well, since you are working on the beginning stages of the Europa source book, file away.
Yeah, exactly.
File away. Last goal that they have is to naturally reestablish control of the Catention territories, because the main rival, as Josh has laid out, has always been House Vistrimmen primarily, and they fought against House Vistrimmen in the first Theran War, and Vistrimmen has control over 6 former Catention villages. This also fuels the upstart House Catambris, because they view House Catention as weak, and Travar has built an airship fleet now to challenge House Catention, so they've got opponents on all sides, pretty much. So again, this is your Game of Thrones Earth Dawn style.
The fact that House Catention has sort of backed the losing horse ultimately in a way in the Theran Empire means that all of the people that previously had sort of needed to put up with them are going, maybe we can rattle their cage a little bit and shake things up. And the fact that Travar has been building an airship fleet means that they no longer need to ship things over the river as much, and sort of can get around the problems. I mean, ultimately, there are not as many airships as there are riverboats, but it does allow the wealthier merchants of Travar, Omasu amongst them, to get around the need to pay
Catention
shipping fees and taxes to House Catention.
Yeah.
We'll get into Tecambris in a bit more depth further on in this series, but they're a sort of resurgent, for lack of a better term at the moment, pirate affiliation that are taking the opportunity to nip at the heels of House Catention and steal business and influence from them along a particular stretch of river. And then the rising fortunes of House Vistrimmen over the past few decades, since the first Theran War up to present day, is a sore spot as well. It's got to be rough when a great house that has largely, in some respects, defined itself by its military prowess and reputation has kind of been on the losing end of battles, long term, for the past 50 years or so.
Yeah.
That's got to rankle the shivalahala to a certain extent. And it remains to be seen whether that is something that is going to result in a reassessment of their strategic and tactical goals, or what.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question that definitely worth exploring if you're into that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I think this would absolutely rankle the shivalahala, especially since you've been losing battles and you are in charge of the war college. This has to be, I'm the best at what I do, but you keep losing. Are you really the best at what you do? So I think it's very prideful for her. So I think there's a nice little realm to explore there as well. So on to the war college, because we had a couple notes on this one as well. The academy at the war college can house up to 600 recruits at a time. So this is like joining West Point, for a example. Only 25 non-Catention are admitted each year. So it tells you, if it can house up to 600, how many members are in House Catention top to bottom. So kind of a lot. 12 scholarships are awarded after an annual open tournament. So 12 of them get in free, otherwise you have to pay House Catention rates. So if you're looking for a way in to use House Catention as a foil adversary in the background, maybe an open scholarship for somebody to try out. And and only 25 non-contention are admitted each year. So really, you can have one of your warrior players want to go through the academy a little bit and investigate, but it is a 6-year commitment to graduate, and it is 99% to Scrang there. So if you're going to run that as a side-off one-shot campaign, know your to Scrang and how they operate. However, when you graduate after 6 years, graduates do get a gold and ruby ring. Less than half of these people who attend actually graduate, and it is traditionally worn on the left hand. So little details you can kind of throw in if your party comes across being raided by House Carinci, or they end up, I don't know, in a bar somewhere talking to somebody who's a graduate recently. If they're checking out the left hand or so, there better be a ring there. Not necessarily a wedding ring, but at least, the gold and ruby ring. So some little details about the War College, the shivalahala, and perhaps how to introduce your players and or your campaign based upon something that House Contention is involved in, because it's kind of a lot. There's a lot to draw from here.
Yeah. The War College is very definitely something that is likely to has the potential to have a presence within the game if you want it to, even if you are not necessarily going to be dealing a lot with the politics of House Carinci and the Tiskrang in general. Of course, if you are going to become involved in the War College, you are going to somehow become involved in the politics.
Yep.
The War College is, in addition to being one of the best warrior schools, is also one of the best tail dancer schools as well. If you look at the Tail Dancer essay in Mystic Paths, there's even more information. Usually, the whole Tail Dancer thing is above and beyond the normal curriculum for the Academy. And so, if it can house up to 600 now, because it is a 6-year program, each class would conceivably have, because only about half end up graduating, you're going to have a lot more people there first year than you are sort of the graduating class.
Yeah.
It is very definitely something that could be of interest. The problem is, of course, because it is a 6-year training thing, it is likely not going to be something that is going to be accessible as an active thing for
a campaign
player characters, because it's largely going to take them out of the game
for a long period of time.
They have to be devoted to their training and schooling there. And it's not just combat, but you mentioned West Point.
Yes.
It also teaches tactics and history, military history, and military theory and all that sort of stuff. So it really is a military academy in that sense. And the people that graduate, that survive the grueling...
Yeah, it's like Navy SEALs training.
6-year program. They are among the best of the best, and there is a certain amount of renown that would go along with being a graduate of the War College, especially if you are not a Catention.
Yes.
If you are one of the few non-Catention that get admitted and then manage to last through to graduate. That is a pretty remarkable
achievement.
Yeah.
And really, this is also good for a character backstory. Like you went to the open tournament and failed, or maybe you went to the open tournament and made it through the first year and then got flushed out. And so you have this as a background as far as your character is concerned. And so you've got some animosity or some idol worship for House Carinci. Take your pick. You still worship them that you didn't qualify, or you want to go back in again. And so you're aiming for that. And so you're going on these adventures to better your skills or your talents to get back into the work. I mean, take your pick. This is gold over here. This is, storyline gold for your character and storyline gold for any campaign you want to run. And really, if you wanted to do like a Harry Potter type where you stay at school and that's where the adventure actually takes place, it's possible.
There is certainly enough going on. Again, you've got like you'd be running sort of a city-based game largely with the various members of the Nials and the 16 towers and all of the stuff going on there. So you could conceivably have a game that is kind of a students at the academy. And you could draw sort of thing. You could
draw plot lines from all kinds of military training movies to draw. Biloxi Blues, Annapolis, Full Metal Jacket are the three that I can think of right off the top of my head. And I didn't even prepare for that.
Yeah, even better. Others would be like Toy Soldiers, Well, we
love that movie.
that's one that's set at a military academy.
Biloxi Blues, if you want some humor.
I was going to say Stripes, but that's a different flavor entirely.
Totally, but there's still adventure in there.
So that, there's certainly if you can come up with stuff there's certainly some potential for some interesting stuff going on there.
I seriously want to see if anybody has either done that or can pull that off. Please write to us and tell us how you did it and exactly what you used to draw from to see if you can do a War College mini campaign or even extended campaign in just that War College with your party. I am absolutely hoping somebody can pull that off.
That's one that probably is like, it's a really cool idea, but because of the strictures of the War College itself, you're looking at a group that is going to be
all warriors
and swordmasters and be, almost all to scrying. Like, that would be the sort of thing where you are intentionally from the ground up having the game built around that. It's not going to be okay, go ahead and make your characters and then we'll figure out what we're going to be doing. This is going to be a game that is, okay, this is what we're doing, and you kind of have an idea, a lot more sort of NPC stuff, and the combat would be a lot more like training drills and mock combat and stuff like that. And of course, as is you're sort of dealing typically with, if you're talking about the students in school adventure kind of series, obviously they're going to be going out and having little adventures elsewhere and stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah. I want someone to pull that off and write to us and tell us how they did it. Anyway, I think that wraps up House Carinci. Are there any thoughts you have on any other 4th edition updates or anything we may have missed that people might want to know, or how they could use House Carinci in ways we haven't talked about yet?
No, I think we've kind of touched on the broad strokes here. I've mentioned some things that are likely to be different as you're approaching it from a 4th edition timeline standpoint post Second War.
Yeah.
Like I said, the House Carinci are sort of classed as an antagonist group typically because of their alliance with the Theran Empire, but they're not really bad guys the way that we will discuss in a bit more depth when it comes to House Ishkarat a little bit down the road. Because those are also bad guys, but in a very different way. House Carinci has a much longer history and much more sort of political involvement with everything that has happened in Barsaive, as opposed to the others, which we will talk about later.
Absolutely. So until next time, folks, drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions for us, we will get to those. If you want to hear something more about House Carinci, please, by all means, lead with that. But until next time, I think you should go find 9 diamonds for your legend.
Good night, everybody.